right, welcome to another episode of Reptile Fight Club. Today we got a good one for you. We got a couple good guests on, Phil Bradley and Casey Cannon, and they're going to be discussing the Invisible Ark that was by the Barkers. So should be an interesting discussion. With me, as always, here is my co-host, Chuck Poland.
How's everybody doing?
All right, so I don't think we're going to chit chat much today. Let's
I want to get into this. I want to hear what these gentlemen have to say.
Yeah. So welcome to the podcast, Bill and Casey. Maybe we'll have you guys kind of give a brief introduction of yourself, what you do, what your ties to the reptile world are, and then I'd like to hear the story of how this podcast invitation came about, because it's pretty hilarious.
Because it makes me sound insane.
Maybe
what is insanity, really, though?
I mean, verbally accosting.
It's a pretty funny story,
kind of. No, so, I became acquainted with Casey through the Snakes and Stogies crew, and I frequent their chat, and I tune in pretty regularly, and Casey is very involved with them. He's been on a couple times. He's also in the chat pretty routinely, so we've talked back and forth. And then I started talking to Justin about potentially coming on my podcast. And unbeknownst to me, Justin and Casey had been talking separately about other snake issues and things like that. And I brought up the idea. No, go ahead.
So here's the issue we were talking about was for my entire carpet python keeping career, I have been a pretty staunch purist. And it's like, well, I saw something cool at the Schaumburg show over in Illinois that was going on back in June. There was a 75% inland Darwin cross. So 75% inland carpet python, 75% Darwin carpet python, 50% Posset albino. The Australians have made some albino inland crosses that I thought looked incredible.
Yeah,
so I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
I didn't make them. Honestly, it's probably better that I get them than anyone else does, which is, the excuse everyone comes up with for stuff like this. And I bought them and I showed them to a group chat that involved Justin Julander. And of course, he was not happy with them. I was like, I didn't make them. I just bought them. And there was kind of this thing going off. So whatever, walking around, this guy coming down off the escalator, a very tall, bearded, bald, blue-eyed man, just looks me dead in the eyes as he's coming down the escalator and I'm about to go up it. Goes, Justin Julander told me to fight you. Just like that.
Yes.
Justin Julander told me to fight you. And I was like, whoa, he's serious about these carpet crosses. Like, I thought it was gonna be like in John Wick, where like everybody's looking down at their phone and like gets the whole hit thing, like first person to kill Casey Cannon gets a scrub python named after them in the new book.
That's awesome.
My defense, it's COVID season and the internet has messed up how people interact with one another.
There you go.
Casey and Billy were walking through the hotel, and I know who they are. I have talked to them, but clearly not in real life, right? And I had been talking to Justin and was like, oh yeah, cool. I just kind of assumed we all knew what we were talking about. And I look like me. And so I was like, oh yeah, there he is right there. And so I did. I said it exactly like that, coming down the escalator in this giant hotel. I didn't introduce myself. I just straight up said that. And Casey was like, okay. And I was like, oh yeah, with the podcast and talking about the Invisible Ark, it's going to be cool. And just kind of breezed on through. We're like, yeah, we'll see you guys at the auction. Great. And it was a very short interaction. And we were walking out the door and my wife is like, what is the matter with you? Like that, he clearly had no idea who you were when you said that. And I was like, no, I know who that is. And I was like, I'd already talked to Billy that day. Like, yeah. And my wife was like, no, man, no. 100% not a clue. He had no idea what you're talking about. You just yelled that down the stairs at this hotel. What is the matter with you? I was like, I don't think it was that bad. And then Billy messages me and was like, man, what was that? I was, sorry.
It was. I was literally looking around like, if we're about to fight, like, we did. We went out to dinner later. It was great. But yeah, like I was looking around like, okay, we're about to fight here. Like, you know, worst comes to worst, there's a lamp over there. I'll hit him in the head with that lamp. Like, I literally like assessed my scenario.
Weapons.
Like, this going down. Like, I'm gonna fight dirty.
Yeah. Take that, all you people who think Reptile Fight Club isn't serious.
Yeah. Or bring that energy to the discussion here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was
That's
just perfect timing because I was just giving Casey a hard time just because I knew he was more of a purist and he's buying crosses. I just was giving him a little hard time about that. Well, I wasn't serious. I didn't really care if you bought crosses. And honestly, the albino inlands that they made, the cross inlands, are pretty cool looking. I can't say that out loud too often, but yeah. So
I think Button's gonna burst down your door and show us what a real fight club looks like.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was perfect timing. Really a great story. It couldn't have had better timing. Just it was completely separate topics, completely separate conversations that coalesced to have a nice entertaining conclusion there. Mm-hmm. So anyway, yeah, we got you guys here. So we didn't have anybody get hurt in the process, so that's good.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No blood was actually shed in the in pursuit of this endeavor.
All right, Bill, why don't you give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. I'm Bill Bradley, and I am the host of Lizard Brain Radio. And along with my wife, I am one half of Coal Black Exotics. We do educational demonstrations with reptiles, pretty much all over Illinois, most of the Midwest. And like I said, NPR folks and Herpetoculture Network folks, I've frequented as a fan of all of those shows and in the chat and different things. So I'm a face floating around different podcasts.
If you haven't heard Bill's, if you haven't heard Bill's podcast, it's fantastic. Lizard Brain Radio. You got to check it out. It's really fun. Yeah. All right, Casey, how about yourself?
Okay. I'm Casey Cannon. I'm probably in the reptile world best known for Brettles pythons. I have a degree in ecology and biology right now. I used to do a lot of, I'd help out undergrads and graduate students with surveying jobs in reptiles. So, I kind of have a little bit of a background in population genetics, ecology, stuff like that kind of links back to this show right here. And
cool. Yeah. Kind
of some of the concerns I have with this topic.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'm very jealous because Casey has found a Brettles in the wild, and I have not accomplished that yet. I looked for a steady week and a half or 2 weeks, and it was really rainy, so I blame that, and I just need to go back and look again. But I
Casey,
really enjoyed your.
Yeah. Oh, it felt that was
to chap
amazing.
Justin's butt cheeks like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I found it within 24 hours of being there too.
Oh, see, it was easy peasy right there. That snake wanted him.
Yeah,
wanted him.
I guess I've had my fair share of luck, so I can't complain. But
there you go.
Another reason to go back. I'd love to see a Brettles in the wild. They're such amazing snakes. So very cool. I'm glad you were able to find one, and I was really enjoyed your telling of the story of finding it and your interactions with it and stuff like that. So
I wish I could have spent a little more time looking at it, but it was just not that kind of time, I guess.
Yeah, it's tricky, you want to see as much as you can, and you think, if I found this within 24 hours, what am I going to find in the next 24 hours? So it keeps you going, but then sometimes you're like, man, maybe I should have stuck with that snake for a little longer and hung out with it, watched what it did for a bit longer.
Yeah, that was the only one we found, but it was a 7.5 foot beautiful, I don't know if it was a male or female. We're going to say it's a female just because that makes a better story. So
yeah. Cool. Well, welcome.
It was what you say it was.
Yes, absolutely.
You weren't there. You don't know.
We're glad to have you guys on here, and thanks for doing this. So, well, without further ado, let's knock some teeth. Let's get some fight on here. So we'll do the coin toss, and whoever wins the coin toss gets to kind of pick which side they defend. Either kind of pro the idea of the invisible ark, and we'll let you guys kind of explain your side and what side you're taking as we start out here. But we got to have the coin toss and let fate decide what side you take. So who wants to call it?
Tails.
All right, here we go.
I feel like everyone picks heads, so let's do tails.
It's heads. I'm sorry to say, there, if you can see that. I've had to start. I need to start showing it because Chuck doesn't believe me because I keep beating him every week. So I'm going to start showing it to you guys. At least
me and Casey are the losers.
All right, Bill. That means you get to decide which side you defend and which side you take, I guess.
I am in defense of the Invisible Ark concept.
All right. Siding with the Barkers here. You're in pretty good company, I suppose. we'll see how it goes.
It's a good start.
Yeah. And as the winner of the coin toss, you get to pick if you go first or if you defer to Casey to start us out.
Ooh, I will defer to Casey.
Yeah, that's Chuck's move. Yeah.
If I have any patented move, that is my patented move. Yeah.
We'll call it the Chuck from now on. You just chucked him. All right, Casey. Let's hear kind of what your side of this is and why you kind of would say the Invisible Ark may not be the best idea, if that's what you're purporting. All right, go ahead.
Not necessarily. Well, okay, let's jump in here. Okay, so the Invisible Ark concept does seem to push more of a quantity over quality as far as captive gene pools and conservation in general. It's very much like, okay, well, nature's going to die. Let's make as many of these in captivity as we possibly can. It doesn't really matter how we make them. It's more, we should be mass producing all endangered animals. Seems to be a big point in the book. The book does go as far talking about tigers, saying, okay, well, there's already only about 3,000 tigers in the wild versus upwards of 5,000 to 10,000 in captivity. Some of those say the state of Texas alone, depending on what sources you look at.
Wow.
And which, if you actually listen to tiger conservationists, and again, like this whole concept covers all animals and plants in captivity. It's not just reptiles focused. It's just the Barkers were reptile people, so most of it is geared towards reptiles, but they do make a lot of arguments for tigers, for giraffes, for gorillas. Okay. So you listen to why conservationists do not want to take animals that were from captivity, or say that, even go as far and sometimes calling them trash tigers, which is a lot of them carry deleterious mutations or unnatural mutations like the golden tigers, the white tigers. A lot of them are intergrades between, say, Siberian tigers, Bengal tigers, Sumatran tigers, which makes them completely, it invalidates them as far as a conservation tool.
Now, reptile people don't chase morphs, right? I mean,
no, never. Reptile people would never do that. It's,
it's just with tiger
dragons.
People.
Yeah, it's just,
yeah, it's exactly like you'd find them in the wild.
Yeah, which is also, again, an issue you see with some of the most popularly available reptiles in captivity. Bearded dragons, leopard geckos, corn snakes. They're all multi-species, multi-subspecies hybrids. Mm-hmm. So while they're fantastic as a domesticated population, as a pet captive population, they're worthless. They're null as far as being a captive population that could be part of a conservation project.
Okay.
So.
All right. Yeah, well, Bill, how would you respond to that?
So we talked a little bit before we started that this is a very multifaceted issue in how we would kind of have to approach and discuss it. So I have a few points off of what Casey said. I think that most people who look at the concept of the Invisible Ark are looking at it in the incorrect manner. So the way I took that book when I read it is that the Invisible Ark concept is fatalistic, in that the reason the Invisible Ark was so important to the Barkers and to the people who are proponents of it is because of the idea that there won't be a wild to repatriate these animals to. And so it seemed to be that was the reason that they were so intent on having a large captive population, is because their big fear was that there would be no wild population for us to get new genetics from, and no wild area for us to put the animals back into. And so that led to, that is a great idea for some species in their very unique situations. And then how we implement it is usually terrible, in that we don't follow an SSP and we don't do the things that the AZA would like, and the very regimented way that it needs to be done, which is a major problem. But that doesn't invalidate our ability to do it. We just need to do it in a better way. And then to the point of something like tigers or large mammals, giraffes and things like that, that's a secondary issue, in that most of those people, I think, way back in the day when it originally started, they care about those animals and they are able to breed them. And then their pipe dream goal was, well, if we could do it here, and then even if our animals can't be repatriated due to their issues, maybe we could help those people breed those animals where they're at. And then that the people who champion those ideas just didn't have any concept of how difficult that really would be, right? Is you can't just go to Sumatra and be like, you don't know what you're doing. I know how to breed tigers. You should listen to me. That's just not how that works. And it is a little bit of a pipe dream to think that I could breed golden mantellas. Now, if I can just go down there and show you how to breed these frogs, you will care and also breed the frogs or take them from me, and then we can do this great thing. Also, please stop chopping down your rainforest and care about frogs. And there's just so many layers to that, in that I think their original idea is in the right place, and they had a thought of attempting to do the right thing. But we talked about this at the start. It's the implementation that is the issue. Because we are clearly very successful at breeding tigers, and we can breed giraffes and rhinos and different things. It's just we can't ever get them back there. And then we run into this hard place where we have tons of tigers. They don't really look like tigers where they're from, but you're probably not going where tigers are from anyway. So you would never see one in the wild. You can see one here. And if that can get you to monetarily move toward conservation, that was always the goal, right? I just want you to care about these animals so that you'll then give dollars. That was the whole thing for zoos. Is the SSP is wonderful, and for some species it does, they repatriate animals and so on and so forth. But the real goal was to get you to care about animals so that you would recycle and participate in conservation and do all of these things. Like there were ulterior motives other than maintaining a population of animals. That was just something they also did. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Casey, do you want to respond to that and maybe add something to it?
So, I do agree that in a lot of cases, repatriation is not necessarily possible. But I think by a lot of definitions, conservation is about preserving habitat. In fact, it's probably more so preserving habitat and biodiversity than it is preserving individual species.
Absolutely.
Which the concept of the Invisible Ark is, okay, if the zoo doesn't want to protect, I don't know, the standing day gecko or something like that, there's a lot of private keepers that keep standing day geckos. And maybe one day, if they're extinct and they want to bring them back, you just go to a standing day gecko breeder and say, hey, we'll take these. But that's not going to happen. You talk to, we can give, the hobby is great in giving tips on how to breed. If conservationists came out and said, okay, we're going to go through, what we've got, some of what we caught in the wild, maybe a few of your animals, and we're going to go through and test to see how genetically distinct all these animals are. That would be, they would go in and say like, okay, well, how do you breed these things? Like, obviously you're good at it, but the animals you've made are so inbred or so morphed out, or whatever other host of issues you could possibly have. Maybe we want one bloodline from you guys, because at the end of the day, all you have is one bloodline. But preserving a captive gene pool is more important than making a lot of animals, which this book seems to push a lot. Is we need to make a big quantity of a species. We need to commercialize them. There is a part in the book where they talk about giraffe breeding, how maybe zoos, instead of having like big giraffe habitats, needs to have like smaller giraffe stalls that are for nothing but like pumping out as many giraffes as possible that could one day not go to the wild, but, supply private keepers. Like if you have a farm, you would have easy access to a giraffe, and that would be conservation, which that's really just not conservation. It's preserving a captive population, but there's a difference between preserving a captive population and actual conservation. That's a small part of it, and that actually is a little bit of a fatalistic idea. Is like, okay, we're going to have this like little group on back order, basically, if we fail at preserving the habitat. But, there is an issue where if you start to introduce supply and demand into endangered species and into breeding and trying to pump out as many individuals as you can, you start running into what we see in everything humans breed, which is if you're pumping out a bunch of giraffes and one day you hatch out, one day a black one plops out a mom and it's a male, what's going to happen if you are more concerned with breeding for profit is you're going to take that boy and you're going to say, go to all of them because you're worth $2 million versus these other giraffes have been breeding for years that are worth, I don't know, 50,000. We're just making up numbers here. Which there's nothing wrong with that either, I would say. It's just that's not conservation. That's the process of domestication, which is what humans have been doing to all captive animals since we've had captive animals.
Yeah, I wonder too, like if it's even, I mean, once you take something into captivity, you're changing its gut microflora, you're changing its most likely you're changing its diet and its survivalship in the wild, how well it can survive in the wild. I mean, you take in some.
Well, it's not even co-evolving with its natural habitat anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
you're putting on a different evolutionary trajectory if you want to look at it that way, because you're
doing what you do with
continent. Yeah.
You're doing what you do with all domestic species too, which is you are breeding them for ease of breeding in captivity. You're breeding them so that they're less seasonal. You're breeding them so that maybe if the giraffe can only have one baby at a time, it's more profitable if they have twins. So we're going to start selecting for twinning, increase litter size, which, that would take a long time, but that's the path of virtually all captive populations. And,
But if there is no habitat to go back to, I mean, I think that's something Bill could speak to, right? Like if there's,
Well, and that's the issue, right? And I agree with the giraffe example in that it does read that way, in that that's a little bit of a naive take, right? In that, not from Casey, in the concept of the book of, well, we're really great at producing large mammals because we eat them. But if we wanted to produce large mammals for an ulterior purpose, conservation, because we think the giraffe's kind of a weird one because it would rely on the idea that the African grassland is going away, which is a little weird. But if that was your fear, and you knew you lived in a country that was great at industrial farming of large mammals, I could see, again, it's kind of a naive take, but I could see how a person would be like, yeah, we're awesome at breeding cows. I bet you we'd be great at breeding giraffes. And it, again, that goes to the idea that those people don't have any concept of it is, that animal is never going back to Africa. It will only exist where you are at. And if you are convinced that that African biotope was gone, then you're probably okay with that. But most people have a major issue with that. And to the rest of Casey's idea in resource management, right? And I think the reason that the Barkers and folks that support the concept the Barkers put forth, the reason that resonates with them is that resource management. If they have that fatalistic point of view and palm oil plantations are wiping the place out and I can breed Borneo earless monitors, regardless of how they got into this country, which was a little sketchy.
A little bit.
But I should, because my devotion of resources to preserving Borneo has no point, right? Me, I can breed little snot dragons that eat earthworms and look cool. I can't save Borneo. So what I have for resources, I need to dump all of them here. I think those people feel pigeonholed a little bit, and they already maybe had that fatalistic point of view. And so they're like, look, man, I can breed cows, I can breed giraffes, I can't fix African grasslands. I'm breeding giraffes. And who doesn't want a melanistic giraffe? Like,
It'd be pretty sweet. Like,
it would be cool. But like, again, it's implementation, right? And there are different, like, HCI and different folks that are working on different things for doing conservation, and the conservation they're trying to do is in situ. And when you talk to them, it is so difficult. Like, most of those groups are picking a singular project. They're purchasing land or working with locals or what have you, and they're just trying to do one thing. Whereas, I mean, think of all the nerds that we know. We keep tons of species. If you guys could find that one endangered carpet python, I know you could keep it alive. You could probably breed it. Like, it sitting here in Illinois, having zero physical connection to Australia. If I'm going to dump time and money and energy into it, I'm just going to give it to you guys and let you breed it. And so that I know it will exist here just in case the next fire torches the whole continent, because I don't have any control over that. People kind of feel like they're floundering, and a lot of things involving conservation and ecology are alarmist, and they should be, because we're wrecking the place. But for folks that don't feel like they can help with that, and maybe lack a little bit of the education level on the scientific side, that kind of feels like their only outlet, right? I went to Zach Herr and got the entire Ranatomea poster. I've bred all those frogs. Of course I can breed golden mantellas. Like, that's no big deal. And then you do, and that feels like a major accomplishment. Like, I am preserving this species because if it's in my living room, it is not extinct. And I understand the
I do feel like that's the core argument of the Invisible Ark, though, is if it's in my living room, it's not extinct. So yeah, no, keep going. I was just saying, like, essentially that's the whole book boiled down into
yes,
like one sentence.
And I 100, and again, we talked about this before, is it's hard to argue when we agree on a lot of stuff. And I agree with you that our implementation is very poor. And especially when you at the hobbyist level, we don't have SSPs, and there are very few Nick Muttons in the world that have crazy lineages for all of their things. And there aren't enough of us that do that. And if that's something we're serious about, we really should. That should be a great deal of our efforts is in that. And we really should work to make strides with copying SSPs or adopting those methodologies, if that's something that we seriously believe. The issue is that the vast majority of people that probably bought and read that book knew who the Barkers were because they're snake nerds and they're just hobbyists, which is not to denigrate them. That's not a bad thing. But their interest level and education level and involvement in either herpetoculture or the science of ecology and conservation is just a hobbyist. And so they give a couple bucks to HCI or RPI or any of those folks, and they keep some of these animals. And then when they had the opportunity, they were able to get a really rare thing. And that feels like you are accomplishing something. We likely know that in the grand scheme of things, you aren't, but it'd be really hard to convince that person they weren't, because if that white rhino just died, that just happened, and there's one at my farm in Texas, they're not extinct. That's math. Like 0 or 1. I have one. It's really hard to argue with those people, and they get very set in that fatalistic point of view, and that's why I don't necessarily think that they're wrong. I wish that they weren't so right about there not being any place to put the animals back into, right? And that, I think that we get kind of stuck in that, right? Is like, oh, it's just, conservation through commercialization, and it's just a bunch of guys with dart frogs or a bunch of guys with earless monitors, and they're not actually conserving Borneo or any of these places. And it's like, well, no, they're not, but you kind of feel helpless with Borneo, with the Amazon, with these things. I feel pretty awesome when I breed dart frogs. That's a hard argument to make with people.
I wondered too, like, taking maybe rhinos as an example, if you transported all the rhinos into Texas and had them breeding there in a stable population, kind of out in the semi-wild, and breeding with who they wanted to, and fighting and that kind of thing. So you maybe have a more realistic or natural group of them. But if you're sending them, sending offspring back to Africa or Asia or wherever they came from, are you just kind of providing a continuous market for poachers, to just lop their horns off and leave them to rot, that kind of thing. So, you wonder sometimes if those efforts would even have a good result in the end, or if you just have to say, well, they live in Texas now, Africa's right. Kind of.
And to Casey's point about giraffes, he is correct because he's correct about human nature, which is unfortunate. My idea is correct. My concept with the conservation through commercialization and the fact that we have an infrastructure for farming and we could keep large mammals and so on and so forth is correct. It's accurate. It relies on people doing the right thing. If Ted Turner gave us one of his ranches and we did the Zoolander Rhino Mad Max Thunderdome and we got the good ones, and then we went back and we took calves and released them and repatriated and so on and so forth, awesome. Which relies on Turner giving us a ranch, Zoolander doing a Thunderdome for rhinos, nobody killing them where they live, which would have to change an entire culture that thinks that fingernail material is great for male enhancement. And it relies on so many factors that we don't have any control of. And so I think that's where that fatalistic viewpoint is, to where you're like, you know what? It's Justin's herd of rhinos in Texas. Done. And the people just get stuck,
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Casey. Let's see.
Yeah, so I got a couple points here. Okay, we're about the rhinos and like, okay, well, what if we bred them and and maybe in some cases shaved off their horns and shipped them off to Asia? That I think is actually a pretty valid conservation strategy. I know there's some people in South Africa trying to push for that right now. Conservation through commercialization is something that I think the reptile hobby really, really misuses that term. The idea of, okay, a Borneo earless monitor costs $5,000, a Bolin's python costs $10,000. Now there's so much incentive to try to buy those. I don't really think that's how that works. I think on a lot of times you end up making an animal that looks really, really good on Instagram because it looks cool, and you get clout for saying I spent $5,000 on one animal, which, you see that with Bolin eye quite a bit. There's a lot of keepers in the United States who only have one Bolin's because let's be real here. If you get a really good video of a Boelen's python, it's going to go viral. And you can make money off that video from just having one Boelen's python. But conservation through commercialization has saved a few species, most notably crocodilians. Okay, most crocodilian populations that are in, going up, are in a large part because of crocodile farms. But the farms don't necessarily breed them. What they do is they will, at least in South Florida, they'll go through and they'll ride a helicopter and look at nests. They'll take the nest, get the eggs, incubate the babies in captivity, raise them up until they're about 3 years old, and slaughter all but maybe like 5 or 10% of them for meat and for skins. But that 5 or 10% that were taken at random are now put back into their habitat. And that has actually saved crocodilian species. Now, you can argue, hey, it's not a good thing that we're killing these animals and using them for leather. But, I mean, the American alligator is not an endangered species anymore. They're working on doing that for ones in Southeast Asia as well. I believe the only reason that most of the Northern Territory has crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles, is because of these farms.
Yeah, it's almost been too effective in Northern Territory. Now they're having more issues with problem crocs and having to cull and stuff. Yeah.
So that is conservation through commercialization. That's not, but on the other side, that's also not captive breeding. You're relying on a wild population to supply you and then resupplying them with head-started animals that go on to breed. And it's a very effective strategy for crocodilians. Whether or not that would be for rhinos, which breed, they're more of a K, what is R versus K, a K species versus where they only have one baby every 3 years versus crocodilians, which lay 100 eggs every other year.
Yeah. How you put your eggs all in one basket or not. Yeah. 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 I mean, man, this is such a great discussion. And my undergraduate degrees in environmental science, and I don't work in environmental science. And I
don't either. There's no money in it.
well, but I feel like climate science is pretty clear. We understand that anthropogenic climate change, and we're altering the face of this planet because we're the dominant species, and we're not slowing down. And I don't even work in my degree because I don't think I don't think me spending the rest of my life fighting for a planet that every other human being is benefiting from abusing. And maybe that'll turn, but that's going to turn when it's so far gone that we're not going to be able to bring it back. And we're outpacing, animals' abilities to adapt. And I honestly have a very fatalistic view of where we're going. So this is such an interesting topic. One that hits kind of close to home for me, because I'm not out there doing what I probably should be doing. But at the same time, does it matter? I mean, if we have nowhere to put these animals, that they stay with us, they stay in our care, and it's the best we can do. And we ride this shit out until the end, and that's it. I mean, you guys have any thoughts on that? Sorry, that was my tangent.
No, you're good. I like listening to it. But no, I think a fatalistic view is needed in a lot of cases. I mean, you can look at maps of the island of Borneo from the 70s to now, and it's like the forest is getting smaller, the towns are getting bigger, and that doesn't look like it's ever going to stop. So, again, I feel like true conservation should always be about preserving habitat, but there is the entire thing of like, what if the people there don't care? Right. And the biggest issue with conservation, in my opinion, is it is a democracy at the wrong times, and it is not a democracy at the wrong times as well, where you may have 50,000 people that say, hey, I want the Indian rhino to survive. One guy with a gun next to a Indian rhino is going to outvote those 50,000 people. Yeah. But so going back to the Invisible Ark discussion.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. No. It's good. That was all part of it. But sometimes I have a hard time arguing that our hobby, having some of the animals we do, is actually a net positive for those animals as far as a conservation perspective. Okay. Chuck, you bred Halmahera pythons.
I did.
A couple times, right? You're
Twice.
how many eggs of Halmahera pythons have been laid at this point and have hatched?
14.
14. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a mean question. How many Halmahera pythons do you think have been taken out of the wild and died in captivity to make those 14 babies?
Hundreds upon hundreds, probably.
Yeah. So while it's amazing, we're starting to build up our captive population of Halmahera pythons. And, captive born and bred females are the best thing you can possibly have to do that because they're easier to breed than anything coming out of the wild. But if you're looking at it from a conservation perspective, was that a good price? Was the price of maybe 1,000 Halmahera pythons coming out of the wild to make 14 babies in the last, since the 90s, let's say they've been coming in?
Probably, maybe even longer than that.
Yeah, the 80s, 90s.
Yeah. But I mean, the juice versus the squeeze. I mean, you can look at someone like Daniel Natouche who says, yeah, the captive green tree or the wild green tree python population is not suffering because of all the importation that we do. So again, it goes back to for me at least, it goes back to their intact habitat. If their habitat is intact, then they are never going to be threatened by humans. Now, if it takes 1,000 animals to figure out how we need to do that, and that's the only option for them, is that worth it? I don't know. But I mean,
well, and two, I mean, if Halmahera all of a sudden starts turning into a plantation,
a parking lot,
for whatever, and they start reducing the habitat, does it matter how many we're taking out of the wild, because that's going to really effectively kill off as many as possible. And Chuck's 14, maybe they go on to produce 10,000 offspring down the road. If, they're captive bred, they adapt better to captivity, they're not wild caught and stressed. So, and now Chuck's figured out, how to breed them. And so maybe that goes on to have, dividends that way. That's, it's kind of a little bit of a trade-off, but, I guess the question is if Halmahera gets turned into a parking lot, then, we've kind of lost it anyway. So at least we have something we can look at and say, remember Halmahera? That's a python that came from there. I don't know. I mean, I can see why that appeals to some people, because even if it's extinct in the wild, we like to say, oh, well, I have one in my living room, or, that kind of thing. And honestly, like things like the rough scale python, they could get wiped out with a really bad tropical storm in their habitat, potentially, you never know. But so, and where there's probably more in captivity than there are in the wild, that's, saying something to some.
And I didn't really mean that in an anti-hobby kind of way. I think it's awesome to breed Halmahera pythons.
Yeah.
It's just, if you're looking at this if we're doing this for conservation, should we be selling, going back to the Bolins thing, should we be selling imports to the first person with $10,000, or should we having a plan put in place of okay, if we're going to breed these, you need to be able to write us up a plan on how you're going to try. Mm-hmm. And then you get the animals. Yep. Should we really be? And if you look at imports too, I love emerald tree boas. I've owned 7 emerald tree boas. I've had to kill 4 of them because they start regurgitating and die. But those animals that came out of the wild, who do you think got them? It's a side business for the loggers. It's not some little conservation group is oh, let's go off and get these animals. We're going to, try to save them from the trees. It's hey, I just cut down this tree and I found this green snake. This guy over here says he'll give me $20 for it. So, by buying those animals, you're not preventing the rainforest being cut down. If anything, you're giving that guy a side hustle to further incentivize it, or however you say that word.
Is that a problem though, Bill? I mean, honestly, if that's a way to get animals that we can work with, is that really a problem? I don't know.
I wish they'd implement that in St. George, Utah, because they pave over Gila monster habitat, but I can't keep one in my herp room. It's frustrating.
So again, multifaceted. For Halmahera, right? You have to have people in Halmahera who care about that for any of that to matter to start. And I understand what you're saying in that it sucks that 1,000 snakes died so we could figure it out and get 2 clutches. The only way for those 1,000 snakes not to die is for somebody in Halmahera to breed them first and then tell us what to do, and then we'll do it, and then we won't have to suffer through all of those consequences. The problem is they don't want to, but they'll definitely sell it to us. We're stuck, right? When you start to talk about things like that, and that's always the conservation through commercialization, right? Zoos only do big mammals and they can only do flashy things because that's what people will donate to. Everybody loves pandas. Nobody cares about brown frogs or what have you. And that's terrible and also true. And so we're left to struggle with that, right? Like I do my podcast is centered on lizards, and I talk all the time about how I want other agamas to replace bearded dragons because there's a jillion different species. I think it'd be super cool and whatever. I would have to jump on an Egypt shipment and get 50 of them to figure out what to do because I'm 30 years behind a bunch of people that knew how to breed Australian agamids and built their own industry ahead of me and their own market. And if I think we should diversify and change that, I get stuck in the wilds of capitalism, right? And but that's also plays into Casey's other point when you talk about Bolin's. I 100% agree that it's terrible for Bolin's and for herpetoculture and for conservation that the first person in line with 10 grand gets that snake. That sucks.
See, I told you, Chuck.
But,
we debated that topic previous.
But we're not the AZA. We're 4 dudes hanging out talking on laptops, right? So we don't actually have a structure in place for that because we aren't an accredited institution and organization, and we don't participate in that way. We participate in herpetoculture, which is just the capitalism of playing with reptiles. And so there's always going to be positives and negatives to that. That particular example is one awful negative. But if they weren't 10 grand, there'd be like 5 of you that even knew what it was. And then 3 of you are probably on the screen right now. Because Ari is some goofy guy who disappears into the jungle for months at a time and comes back with stories of big black snakes. Like, how many people care? You know, a ton of people care on Instagram because they're really expensive and his pictures are amazing. Mm-hmm. But they don't give him any money, and they definitely don't go to Indo and help those people or help those snakes, or and so you're kind of stuck in that terrible place where I totally agree with Casey that the capitalism part of that is killing some of those things, but the flip is if some dude in Halmahera will only sell me Halmaheras, he won't breed them or care about his own place, then all I can do is buy Halmaheras and try to figure it out. Or not buy them, and then that will devalue them even more for him. He'll just eat them. You talk to Owen and Eric, and they went and found an Owen Pelly, and then they were talking to the folks in Australia who study them, and that was their funny story. Was the guy said, "Oh yeah, I found one of my research animals." These 2 dudes were eating it on their lunch break because they're hungry, man. Like what? That's a hard place to be in. Where I wish we had the morals and ethics to participate in an AZA style SSP willingly, and we don't. So my option is to participate in herpetoculture and buy some agamids and do my very best to not let them die for no reason. I don't want them to die at all except of old age, but I need to learn about them and keep them correctly, and hopefully I can breed them and so on and so forth. So it's not a wasted effort, because it's the only effort I can put forth, right? Because I could give to funding for conservation in Egypt where painted agamas are from or what have you, but I definitely can't go there and help because they don't want my help and they don't really care about painted agamas. So I'm stuck, right? That's what I can do is that sucks and is very difficult, but it is my option. right?
Yeah.
As just a regular old herpetoculture person.
You want to respond to that, Casey?
I do want to go back to the whole zoos want to protect large mammals. They want to protect the pandas, the elephants, the zebras, stuff like that. That is an issue with all conservation, where even in
Agreed.
herpetoculture, we like the charismatic stuff. Let's look at the Williams eye geckos, the electric blue day geckos, right? Okay, they're endangered in the wild. At least they were last I checked. They're a CITES 1 animal now. We breed them by the hundreds in captivity. Now, you got to ask, if they weren't electric blue, if it was the dirt brown night gecko versus the electric blue day gecko, would they still be produced by the thousands in captivity? And
Yes,
that's
only
but
to
that's an
feed
issue with
other
anything.
things.
Yes, exactly. But that's an issue with everything in humanity and conservation, is we like the things that are charismatic.
But when we talk about conservation, aren't humans driving the bus? You know what I mean? So we're always going to do the things that we like, that matter to us. And fuzzy mammals, ooh, I like that. Scaly animals, oh, I'm not so sure. There's a subsection of the population that's okay with that, and in that there is better looking and less better looking animals. And even when you're a staunch purist, when you see that right looking cross, you're like, damn, that's badass, I gotta own that, right? So it is a human centric problem, that because we don't live in homeostasis with our planet anymore, our population's out of whack, our resource consumption, our land use, all of that, it's a giant feedback loop. And we won't win with it, right? Like, I don't know. This is great, and you guys are right, and there's no right answer to this, in my opinion.
No, I don't think so either.
No, I think my
I would
answer's
throw
right.
in the question, if
No, I'm just messing around.
how many dirt brown geckos inhabit the same habitat as the electric blue gecko? So if you're focusing on electric blue geckos, you're still, if that results in protection of habitat or setting aside habitat for those things because they're endangered, you're also protecting the other things that are found in their environment. So sometimes, the flashy species, a panda needs a big swath of, forest of so any smaller animals within that forest are benefiting from us preserving pandas, even though pandas want to be extinct or something, they don't like to survive,
Well, that I mean, on the AZA side of things, that's always been the idea, right? Is that's marketing. Is big charismatic animals get you to
the keystone species,
buy a membership and pay or get a stuffed animal or donate or what have you. And then you don't really need to know that we're preserving worms and beetles and stuff. You just need to know that you gave money for savannas because elephants are cool. And that's a marketing thing. And I think that we suck at that as reptile people. So like in my other portion of the hobby where I do education with my wife, that's a huge thing for us is, and I've heard the Herpetoculture Network folks and NPR folks talk about it too, as folks, natural history type information and keeping is becoming more prevalent in herpetoculture, which is really cool. And the reason it's taken so long is because it's a bunch of nerds. Like, if that means you have to know more about the animal, right? And you have to consume more information. That's not something that people want to do, especially in our current culture. And so it's a constant uphill battle of, why are those little brown lizards important, and ecology, and teaching about, the web of life and all that crazy stuff that we have to go through and educate people on. And then also, this snake is ugly. Like, okay, so I have to learn stuff and it's not even cute. Like, that sucks. Okay, well then me and these 5 guys will just keep it alive forever because they're probably going to pave over that thing and make a Walmart. Like, you feel stuck, right? And my wife gives me a hard time whenever I want to add things to my collection for doing shows. And because because I, of course, want things that cost more money because I like weird things because I know a lot about reptiles. And that's pointless for what I do. It doesn't make any sense. I can take a normal ball, a garter snake, and a bull snake and captivate children just as much as I can with a carpet python and a chondro. Like, because they don't know, you know, and that's a really hard thing to do. And so for me, if I care about those things and the little tiny geckos that aren't the electric blue ones, then I feel like I have to take it upon myself. Right. And that's why that Invisible Ark concept resonates with people like that, in that you already feel under attack because you're a reptile nerd. And then not only are you a reptile nerd, but you're a nerd for mud turtles, which even for turtles is lame, you know? And so then now you're like, you're not even cool in your own not cool thing. So you just,
I'm sorry.
you know, like,
I like brown. I like brown scrubs. I get it. I'm so on your page right now.
And I see how the idea resonates with people, and I also see how should they be correct in that habitat is going to disappear, and it's a little brown turtle, and no one cares. Then they're it, right? Mm-hmm. Because if the habitat's gone and you guys only like turtles that have yellow spots or whatever, well, I'm it. And now we're back to it's not extinct if it's in my living room. Just because you don't care, and just because it's an ugly little turtle, it's still here. And so I have accomplished the only thing I felt like I could accomplish, right?
Final thoughts, Casey? What do you got?
Can we talk axolotls for a little bit?
Sure.
Because I feel like as far as the art concept, this is something that I don't know if it's brought up a lot in that circle. It probably is one of the one of the better arguments for it, and it's also one of the better arguments against it. Where axolotls, they're from a small lake right outside of Mexico City, almost completely extinct in their natural habitat. They are they're the most commonly available amphibian on Earth, though. They're so common that they use them as laboratory testing animals. They use them as food in parts of Japan. They're available in every pet store, every aquarium shop. The Petco down your road probably has 2 of them that are, leucistic or melanistic or whatever other color mutation they have.
Yeah.
But you talk to the people that are actually trying to conserve the animals and trying to keep a large population, even the people that are breeding the most of them for the laboratory animals, they'll say, hey, this captive population is not useful to us at all. You know, you guys have gone as far as to even inserting genes from other species into them. Like you have GMO ones that are able to glow in the dark because we took genes from, what were they? Fireflies or jellyfish or whatever it was. Yeah. So that's what they say is like, while these things are phenomenal for research and it's amazing that they are available at pet stores, if we were doing this for conservation to conserve the wild type animal, we don't want them because we can't guarantee you they don't carry one of like 3 strains of albino that's super common. We can't guarantee that they don't have tiger salamander DNA. At the best case, at the worst case, they may have genes from, a jellyfish. So it's like, yes, while there are millions of them in captivity right now, and you could argue through the Invisible Ark that the axolotl is saved, the people who are actually trying to conserve the wild ones say, like, we don't want these animals for what we're trying to do, and which is trying to save this species. So, which goes back to a lot of endangered stuff in captivity in the wild, which is just because they're mass produced, just because they're commonly bred, does not mean that it's useful for trying to preserve anything.
Well, now, so I've been thinking about kind of this idea. Well, if you can breed it to such an extent and have so many available, wouldn't the researchers in the natural habitat, once that habitat is secure, wouldn't they be able to take some specimens from the wild that would be genetically, viable and things like that, the characteristics they want for preserving the species, and then apply the techniques that have been used in the
absolutely
reptile trade?
Yeah, which is what they're
And I
doing
get,
right now on these farms, where
yeah,
they're like, oh, well, they're easy to breed. Like we can, we can probably send you a 10-year-old that can teach you how to breed axolotls because
yeah.
they breed in captivity like nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess, it maybe as a plug for a way that reptile keepers can contribute to this kind of thing is if you figure out something, Chuck, something difficult and breed it, think about publishing those things, because if you're publishing that method or whatever you did to breed those animals, or the secrets that you have for breeding that species, then they're there's a record of that. There's a public record. So down the road, if Halmahera goes, man, we sure are losing a lot of trees, maybe we don't want to pave over the whole place, and maybe we do like those pythons. They're kind of cool. I remember catching those and selling them to the pet trade, and now I can't find one anymore. I would like those to be there, because I've got good memories of them when I was a poor logger, and now I'm okay and stable, and I can contribute to conservation. Oh, look, there's an article by Chuck Poland who's bred them repeatedly in captivity and published his methods, and now I can try to follow that in my own country and repopulate some of these things. I found a couple, and they're still
Let me get
around.
it. Let me get it done more than twice, and we'll work on that. I'm not so sure that I have quite the credibility yet enough to publish anything that I've done.
Yeah.
So.
But and like was said, there's nothing stopping us from being like an AZA institution. We can adopt some of their principles and practices, and I'm sure they would probably champion that. If we're being more like a zoo and taking more of those things into consideration.
I wish I could get. As somebody who's bred something that's hard to breed, I wish I could get my hands on Boeleni and Clastolpus and stuff to show like, no, it's not different. It's all the same.
Yeah.
We're just not doing it right. But it's hard for me to get my hands on that stuff because, Clastolpus is, couple grand an animal now, when it used to be, I bought my Tracy Eye for $500 for the trio. So, it was cheap back then. And now things are getting harder. Things are getting expensive. And I'm not, look, there's a whole argument for that too. And we've had that conversation, but it makes it hard when you're, just an average person and you can't spend 10 G's on a Boeleni. I'd love to, but I'm just not doing that, man. That's Ferrari money. You know what I mean? Like I no way.
And I think we should say there are keepers that are taking this to them, Ty Park.
Yeah.
He's opening up his own zoo right now, and he's actually partnering up with AZA facilities to the point where AZA facilities say, hey, we have surplus Cyclura iguana. We'll help you become part of our project where we can actually introduce these things in the wild. This is something that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot of times I think the AZA, and maybe rightfully so, kind of, reptile, you have herpetologist, AZA, zookeepers, and herpetoculturist, and we're kind of like, hey, why don't you guys let us in here? We're like the 8-year-old cousin trying to hang out with the teenagers. They kind of look down on us like, no, you're not okay. Get out of here. You don't know what you're doing. Some cases they're right, but you have guys like Ty Park, who's getting animals that are surplus from the zoos because they're saying, hey, you're clearly the best guy for this job. You need to partner up with us. We'll tell you which ones to breed together. We'll take off a percentage of them, or all of them in this case, and we'll actually put them towards a true conservation, repatriation project. Yeah. And I do think, in the original podcast where this whole thing started off, I was kind of rough on the Abronia people. I actually do think the Abronia Alliance, while maybe has a few issues, is doing a very good job trying to promote conservation in situ. They're trying to say, okay, if these animals aren't venomous, and going to Guatemala and telling them, these little green lizards off the trees, they're not dangerous. They're actually really cool. Don't kill them. Don't sell them to the people over there that are trying to send them off to herpetoculture. But I feel like a lot of people who have animals like this equate themselves to conservationists. There are quite a few people that I feel like have bought some Gremia off of Flipper's table and said, I'm a conservationist now because I own 3 Abronia that were clearly just off the boat.
Yeah, when
you
in
know, not
reality
part
they're
of,
kind of contributing to to problem
yeah, it's like
rather
the people
than
who call themselves the
escalation.
rescue when they buy a half-dead bearded dragon from PetSmart,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know. But I do feel like, you know, the Abroni Alliance, Ty Park, Cody and Pia are doing some good stuff right now where they're actually trying to raise money for animals, not just in captivity, but in the wild. You know, I feel like that's true conservation that's being done through private keepers, which is kind of what we're talking about here. But your average breeder who's working with crested geckos is not, even though quite a few crested geckos breeders will tell you, like, hey, I'm doing conservation work because we breed crested geckos here, and crested geckos are endangered or extinct in the wild.
Yeah. Well, I would say, one of my good friends started out breeding leopard geckos when he was a kid, and was
Oh,
selling
there's nothing wrong with that. Like,
Yeah, but now he's involved in conservation of endangered species, and he's breeding those species, and
yeah.
doing it with as much skill as he used with the leopard geckos, and he built that skill through leopard geckos and other common herpetoculture species. So I think sometimes the zoo and maybe the research institutions kind of oh, you're just a herpetoculturalist. But I think there's a lot of things that you gain through coming up through herpetoculture that they may lack. And I think there's a good case for that. And we can contribute, but we have to be willing to kind of play by their rules, if that makes sense. And we need to adopt some of their strategies to do it correctly if we're going to be looking at real conservation.
I think if you look at somebody like Steve Sharp, who's been breeding since he was how old? What was that like? He was selling animals when he was like 10 or something like that to
that's
pet
what
shops.
I'm talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're talking about somebody like that, think about how much stronger of a force you put into the AZA world when they come out of herpetoculture from a young age. So, I mean, yeah, I not all perfect, but and the message is important, right? The message that we're putting out, and I think it's tough because we're talking about a very kind of mixed, a mixed message with all of the push pull forces that sit in the hobby, in AZA, sits in even in conservation,
And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against herpetoculture as far as we're breeding common species or even more advanced or rare species. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's sourced ethically, which
for sure.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's more along the lines of, okay, you're not a conservationist because you breed axolotls or crested geckos. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a fantastic base, especially if you're going to go to the zoo world, because I've even heard complaints from so there's the University in Alabama that breeds indigo snakes. I don't remember which one it is. They're doing a big work with that. I watched a documentary and they explain the problems they're having with breeding them. And as a herpetoculturist, I'm like, yeah, it's because you're feeding them fat rats. Like, I could call you up right now and tell you exactly what you're doing wrong because I have experience with this. Yeah. You're not going to listen to me, but I can tell you that if you switch them over to something low fat, you would not be having these issues. So, as a base, like, we do have something we could, a good keeper would definitely have something that they could jump over to the zoo world. Because I've seen issues in zoo collections as far as obesity and, not being kept well.
Yeah. Well, we're over the hour mark. Let's give you each a few minutes to kind of give your final thoughts
off of what you guys
said.
said.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, you were 100% correct in what you said about publishing. So everything that you guys just said in relation to the AZA is marketing. Herpetoculture is marketing itself in the wrong way. Like, you stop thinking about your animals and start thinking about your skill set and what it is you did. And then present that. So, Casey, he can't call the AZA and say, stop feeding indigos rats. They're fat. They don't breed. What he can do is publish something that says the exact same thing that group would then use to alter their protocols, because that is how they work. Right. And so we're just presenting ourselves in the wrong manner. right? You can't come up and say, I have these scrubs, I want to get into your SSP. Not happening. What you can do is present them a paper that you wrote for, here is the cake baking recipe for how to make scrubs that worked for me twice. I have 2 cakes to show for that, and you have 0 cakes. So listen. And
Yeah.
if it's presented in the method that they are accustomed to, they will utilize it. And if it isn't, they won't. And
Well,
we have
we
got
also
to
have-
get out of trying to present our animals. We just can't. It's our skill set and the things that we do with them. It's not the physical animals themselves.
No, very well said. And I think there's opportunities that are increasing opportunities that we have. I would maybe give Zach Loafman as an example of that, where
For
he's
sure.
starting a herpetoculture degree. You can get your degree in herpetoculture, and I'm sure he would be happy to co-publish with somebody that's writing an article and get
He's
it to the
actually
right
said
journals
that in
and
interviews.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then, so my other part was about axolotls, and everything you said was accurate. And for the average person who listens to this and doesn't have a whole lot of exposure to amphibians and things like that, what they'll probably take from that, or if they choose to Google it, they'll find, is that heartwarming story about the nuns who are down there helping with the conservation work in trying to preserve axolotls and trying to preserve the body of water where they're found. Which goes to my point in that the only people down there who care about those things are a group of ladies that care about them because their religion tells them to do a charitable act, and that's what they chose to defend that defenseless salamander. If those people down there don't choose to preserve that body of water or care about that body of water, and they definitely don't care about the weird little alien salamanders that live in it that they never see, that those 6 ladies at the church keep yelling about.
They are on the money, though. That's kind of cool. They're
Oh, yeah.
physically on certain dollars, yeah.
That's cool.
But
keep going.
then the million of them at Petco are what you have, right? And because, especially with axolotls, that is a small space. One dump truck of concrete, and we won't have that conversation anymore. It is a very precarious situation, and several of the ones we've discussed here are in regards to their habitat. But that particular example, I mean, their heartstring story to encourage donation and to get attention and things was literally people who are doing it because their religion is about charity, and these things are defenseless, and so they wanted to help them. They're not herp nerds. They're just doing what they feel is the right thing. And there's like 8 of them. I mean, it's not a lot of people. And, and so when you look at that Invisible Ark concept, that's a wonderful story. And I hope and sort of think it probably will work out. Are you really going to gamble all of axolotls on these 8 ladies who are doing the right thing because they feel that they should do the right thing? Like, there's 10-year-olds that can breed them in their bathtub. Like, let's bank on those kids and hope the ladies do the right thing. Like you're kind of gambling there, and we talked about human nature before of those ladies are wonderful and they're doing wonderful work. And it doesn't feel like something that you can rely on. And so that whole Invisible Ark concept of, I can definitely rely on little kids who breed creepy salamanders because they're cool and they glow in the dark. They'll be here forever. It just feels like a safer bet.
And that's kind of the argument of a domesticated version of them will exist, which
Right.
we have
Yes.
multiple species like that. Like, we don't actually know where chinchillas actually came from. Like, we have animals that we think that they may have been domesticated from, but as far as those very commonly bred animals, we don't actually know what species they came from because they probably went extinct. So the only thing left of chinchillas are these very, very derived domesticated animals, which is kind of where axolotls would head. Probably where
Agreed.
they are going to head. Yeah. Where it might not look it might bear somewhat of a resemblance to the animals that were in the wild, but they're the domesticated version of an extinct animal.
Right.
Well, I think this has been a really interesting and productive discussion, and I appreciate both of your viewpoints. It seems like at one point in the discussion, you flip flopped and
I know,
were
right?
arguing the other side, which is how this goes, and it demonstrates the complexity of the issue. It's not a simple matter. So I appreciate you both kind of sharing one side of the coin, and appreciate your insights. Thanks.
Yeah, this has been an outstanding conversation. Both of you really brought some great stuff to this. I really appreciate you guys coming on.
Yeah, you drug us into. I mean, we got so excited listening to you.
No shit. I felt like, man, I need to get out of this. I'm way in this, but I love it. I'm loving it.
Stealing a couple points from our guests here. But,
I wasn't trying to do that, but thank you guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if our listener wants to hear more from you guys, where can they find you?
I'm on Facebook as Casey Cannon. You can also find me on Instagram as Cannon Fire Reptiles. I'm on both pretty often. Cool.
All right. Bill, I guess we talked about your podcast a little bit, but give us your info.
It's Bill Bradley on Facebook, Coal Black Exotics, Lizard Brain Radio, all that good stuff. The podcast goes out every other Sunday at 8 p.m. Central, and I do it live on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. I don't think there are any reptile nerds on Twitch, but I can stream there, so I do. I do occasionally get one or two people, and one time someone did bring up an axolotl. I don't think they knew what it was, but it happened. So
I feel really bad for whoever's going to listen to this and try to figure out how to spell axolotl based on how it's pronounced.
Yeah. It's one of those spelling words that would stump kids at the spelling bee. Cool stuff. All right, guys. Well, this concludes another episode of Reptile Fight Club. Thanks for listening. Check out all the podcasts on the Morelia Pythons radio network. There's some good stuff to listen to out there, and appreciate them for hosting us, and enjoy the stuff that they put out. So we'll say thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Later.
Fight Club.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.